Sometimes an actor comes along and absolutely changes the face of cinema forever. This is not one of those actors. Born Stephen Frederick Seagal, the story starts in 1952 in Lansing, Michigan. According to his mother, he started his life as a puny, frail asthmatic, before relocating to California, growing his hair out, and eventually diving headlong into a lifetime love of martial arts. It's his love for the art of Aikido that eventually lead to him getting discovered and eventually land him a spot as one of the biggest stars in the world, at least for a little while. He had an interesting ride along the way though, one filled with, according to him at least, CIA undercover work, a few run-ins with the mob, a decades-long career as a blues musician, a storied career in law enforcement, and to top it off, at least according to a plethora of women through the 80s and 90s, he still found time to squeeze in, pardon the pun, plenty of time for sexual harassment. Even so, from the late 80s through the mid-90s, Steven Seagal was one of the biggest, most bankable action stars in the world. Of course, these days, Mr. Seagal's time in the spotlight is, non-existent. But there's no reason we can't look back through his long and storied career, pick out some highlights, try to find out which is the absolute best of Steven Seagal. Mr. Seagal's path wasn't always headed directly to the big screen. In fact, his beginnings and aspirations started a lot more humble than that. He always had a fascination with martial arts. He found himself in Japan learning the art of Aikido, where he eventually earned the rank of master. After that, he bounced around a bit, before eventually returning to California to open his own studio. It was here, and his time spent teaching Hollywood bigwigs martial arts, that he earned his first big break. And contrary to popular belief and playground legend, Steven Seagal was never a Navy SEAL. And despite his claims to the contrary, there's never been any proof that he was ever any sort of covert CIA assassin, but I guess not that there would be, right? I mean, covert kind of means, you know what, doesn't matter. The point is, even though he's definitely not a genuine war hero or super spy, he's still a bona fide martial arts expert. And at least in the late 80s, he was a tall, dark, and decent-looking dude. And that was enough to draw the attention of the right people, eventually landing him a chance to make his first movie, and as luck would have it, one of his best, the 1988 hit Above the Law. In it, Seagal plays a detective and, coincidentally, an ex-CIA Aikido specialist who gets caught up in a conspiracy. It was 100 straight minutes of one-liners, tough talk, flying bullets, and broken arms. Needless to say, it was awesome, and more importantly, it was an instant hit, earning almost $19 million on a budget of only $7. From there, his star was on the rise. It only took another couple of years for him to pop out another instant classic, 1990's Hard to Kill. In this one, Seagal plays a detective and Aikido specialist, go figure, who gets caught up in a conspiracy before his family gets murdered and he ends up in a coma. He eventually wakes up and hunts down the bad guys, and if you think that sounds like a bit much, you're not wrong, but believe me when I say, this movie was a big deal. It opened at number 1 at the box office, the first of his movies to do so, and not the last. It would go on to earn a whopping $59 million at the box office, and pretty much guaranteed Mr. Seagal his place, right up there with the other action stars of the time. His next two movies, Marked for Death and Out for Justice, each also opened at number 1, and brought in a respectable $58 and $40 million, a tidy sum. Now, each of those movies were more the same, with Seagal playing the quiet, almost mystical ex-secret agent character, and he breaks arms and he shoots people, all after getting caught up in some kind of a conspiracy. You might start to notice a bit of a pattern there. As a side note, they were also the first time his musical talents were put to use in movies, having written or performed in songs on each of the soundtracks. And by now, we're into the early 90s, and the release of Die Hard in 1988, most of the studios were trying to come up with their own guys stuck in a building with bad guys franchises. There were a lot of clones and rip-offs to Die Hard through the 90s, from Passenger 57 with Wesley Snipes to Stallone's 93 classic Cliffhanger or Van Damme's Sudden Death. Even arguably, 1990's Home Alone falls into this category. And it makes sense if you think about it. A lone person trapped in a building uses humor and booby traps to take out the bad guys one at a time. That's pretty much just Home Alone. But none of those held a candle to one of Seagal's absolute best, 1992's Under Siege. Now, this was the first time Seagal had worked with real grade-A movie stars like Tommy Lee Jones and, at the time anyway, Gary Busey. And the first and only movie of his to receive an Academy Award nomination. And yet, both of the nominations were related to sound, but the sentiment's the same. The movie opened at number 1, making it the third straight movie to do so, and clear $156 million by the time it was over. By this point, it was official. Steven Seagal was one of the most bankable stars in the world. It was like he could do no wrong, or so he thought anyway. After Under Siege, he could do pretty much whatever he wanted, so he decided to try a turn in the director's chair, this time working with Michael Caine in 1994's On Deadly Ground. And he had another huge box office winner, And for the true Seagal fans out there, this is the first time he whipped out one of those signature jackets. The movie was decent and a must-watch if you're a fan of early Seagal movies. This quote from Roger Ebert's original review really sums it up. "It doesn't pay to devote close attention to the plot, but if you like to see stuff blowed up real good, this would be the movie for you." Which, that's high praise for an action movie in the 90s. It opened at number 1, as one would expect, but it didn't stay there for long. Word of mouth slowed its momentum pretty fast, and in the end, it was the first of his movies not to double its budget and earnings. It ended its run with a paltry $78 million, which is respectable for sure, but a huge step down for Seagal, who up till this point was pure box office gold. Not a year after that, the obligatory sequel to Under Siege came out, 1995's Under Siege 2: Dark Territory. And it was fine, definitely not the same quality as the first. Some people accredit that to the fact that Seagal reportedly rewrote most of the scenes as they were being filmed. Now at the time, he was still one of the biggest action stars in the world, so everyone just sort of went with it. Even so, the movie managed to open at number 2, and that's behind Apollo 13 no less. It went on to make over $100 million, which is not bad at all, but a far cry from the original's $156 million. The following year, 1996, was a busy year for Mr. Seagal, seeing him appear in 2 big movies and beginning filming on a third. The first was his first time in a supporting role, that being the Kurt Russell movie Executive Decision. I remember as a kid being super shocked seeing Steven Seagal in full tactical gear, ready to kick butt and take names. And he wasn't in it for very long.
We're not gonna make it! You are!
The second was 1996's The Glimmer Man, and this movie was not great. He played alongside Keenan Ivory Wayans in a sort of quasi-mystical buddy cop role, and I'm not really sure what you'd call it. Some people attribute the movie's lack of identity and quality to Seagal's apparent demand that he not kill anyone in the movie, or in any movie anymore, something that, if you've been following his career in movies up to this point, made absolutely no sense. After a lot of back and forth, the director was finally able to convince him that the bad guy was really, really bad, and that killing him was the right thing to do. An interesting tidbit, Seagal actually got his way, kind of. After the final scene where the bad guy is very obviously dead, Seagal had him record new lines showing that he wasn't actually dead. The director chose not to use those lines in the new movie, but that's something that totally happened. The movie still, somehow, managed to open at number 2, riding on Seagal's name more than anything in a decent marketing push, but only ended up earning $39 million worldwide. And this with a budget of over $45 million, making this the first legitimate flop of Mr. Seagal's career. The next year gave us 1997's Fire Down Below. In it, Seagal plays a very overly qualified EPA agent, with secret agent background and Aikido skills, obviously. It wasn't a great movie. To his credit, he was fine with killing bad guys in this one, though, so there was that. And there's all the same sort of things you'd expect in a Seagal movie, lots of cool jackets and arm breaking and explosions. But the movie was bogged down with poor effects and poor acting and a heavy-handed environmental message that was lost on most people. As the 90s were coming to an end, it was becoming more and more obvious that, sadly, so was the action movie star part of Mr. Seagal's career. 1998 saw him with a few cameos, a couple producer credits, and his first direct-to-video outing, The Patriot. Now that's not to be confused with Mel Gibson's movie of the same name that would come out a short time later. And full disclosure, I loved this movie when I was a kid. I was a huge Steven Seagal fan, and this movie felt like a return to form for him. It was everything I'd come to expect from a Seagal movie. One man taking on a bunch of bad guys, breaking arms, blowing stuff up, cool jackets. It wasn't until I watched it as an adult that I realized how terrible some of the effects really were and how bad some of the stunts were, and the acting was not great. But still, all things considered, not really a bad movie, as far as I was concerned, at least as a kid. He was relatively quiet after The Patriot, I guess taking time off to charge his creative batteries. He had a couple of producer credits, but nothing really noteworthy. But before we knew it, the new millennium had come and gone, and to longtime fans, it really started to seem like maybe the era of Steven Seagal was at its end. Maybe the Steven Seagal we knew and loved was gone forever. And then 2001 came, and with it, the release of the surprise hit that no one saw coming, Exit Wounds. Exit Wounds was what Seagal fans had been waiting for. This was the guy we'd fall in love with way back in the 80s. It was like Nico Toscani and Mason Storm came out of retirement, or Casey Ryback all grown up. It was a new Seagal movie for a new millennium, and it had everything, man. It had hackers and rappers and Tom Arnold. It was funny and serious and fun. It had everything an early 2000s action movie was supposed to be. And for his part, Seagal really nailed it. Sure, he was a little bit older and a little bit softer around the midsection, but he was still out there, still staring down bad guys and blowing stuff up. The movie did great too, opened at #1, pulled in over $80 million worldwide. For the first time since Under Siege 2, he had a legitimate hit on his hands. He had another movie that year too, in the forgettable thriller Ticker, and it was meh. It was pretty bland for a supposed action movie. The only notable thing about that movie is the return of the ponytail. 2002 saw him trying to capitalize on the popularity of Exit Wounds and failing spectacularly with the movie Half Past Dead. I mean, it wasn't completely without merit. Some of the action sequences were pretty good, and most of the cast around him did a decent job with what they had. But despite a decent marketing push and the well-rounded cast, it ended up just another massive flop under his belt. And that was pretty much the end of Mr. Seagal's time in the theaters. Over the next several years, he'd put out a half-dozen straight-to-video movies, but nothing really notable. And then in 2008, we were treated to Steven Seagal in his best role since Under Siege.
Seagal is cockpuncher.
Seriously though, he wouldn't show up in the cinema again until 2010's Machete. Machete, he played in his first role as the villain in a theatrical release, the Mexican drug kingpin Rogelio Torres. And it's just as ridiculous as it sounds. In it, he has a fight to the death with Danny Trejo as Machete. He's using a samurai sword. It's pretty ridiculous, but it's amazingly bad. Truly something everyone should see. And that's pretty much it. Over the last 2 decades, he put out 20-plus direct-to-video movies. And yes, I watch all of them that I can when they come out. And no, none of this is to say his career completely died with Machete. Because, don't forget, he's still a full-on martial arts expert and musician and a lawman. And he's kept busy since he left the big screen. 2009 saw him come to the small screen for the first time, playing a real-life police officer for 3 seasons on the A&E show Steven Seagal Lawman, which can be a decent watch if you're a fan of cop reality shows and always wondered what it'd be like if Steven Seagal went around pretending to be a cop for real. He followed that up with 2 seasons of the crime drama True Justice on the USA Network. It wasn't great. So there it is, the entire career of one of the biggest action movie stars of the 90s. From a dojo in Hollywood to the top of the box office charts, and then a long, slow, sad fall from grace. So what is the absolute best of Steven Seagal? I think it's pretty obvious.
Seagal is cockpuncher.